Hello and welcome to the Vinny Brusco Show podcast, episode number 421. This week's episode, I am joined by Connor Moore. Connor is the host of the OK Babe podcast, and more notably, he is the host of the Politically Homeless podcast and YouTube channel. Connor takes an approach to politics that really resonates with me personally because I would say I'm fairly politically homeless. I don't ascribe or subscribe to one idea or mindset, whether it be left or right. I kind of float somewhere in the gray area. And that's what Connor brings to the table. The reality is that people just subscribe to one side or the other just because of the title and the tribe mentality. And the reality of it is that most of us actually probably are politically homeless. It's hard to just subscribe to one idea or mindset because we're so diverse in our actual thoughts and our belief systems, and our tribe mentality leads us to believing that we need to think one way or the other. But in reality, we don't. Connor, having a background as a coach, also brings a very mindful and conscious approach to politics. His commentary is not just run-of-the-mill, and it's not just left or right, but it really resides in the middle. And it really is a place to get a non-biased political commentary. And that's what Connor brings to the table. And Connor and I got into a whole bunch of different topics, from politics to the idea of morphic resonance being throughout the country and how we could divide the country maybe into 5 different countries, and just how all of the politics that are going on in the world are being skewed and manipulated by mainstream media, and there isn't the voice of the people. And Connor is bringing that rational voice. It was awesome getting a chance to speak to Connor. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Episode number 421 with Connor Moore. Enjoy.
Hey, this is Connor Moore. You were listening to the Vinny Brusco Show.
And here we go.
Disappointing.
It's whatever. I mean, it is. That's such his life, you know.
Yeah, I guess so. I went to I went to a bachelor party in Texas, and we went to the On It Academy.
The gym is cool.
Oh, it's amazing. It was like my mecca. I went there. I was like, oh my god, I did a 10th Planet class at like 5 in the morning. Everyone's like, where are you going? I was like, it's 5 in the morning. I was like, I'm going to a jiu-jitsu class at 10th Planet. They're like, what the hell's wrong with you? I was like,
Was Curtis teaching?
I don't know the gentleman's name. This was a while ago, and I was a white belt, so I wasn't too entrenched in the into it at that point.
Dude, I did a little bit of jiu-jitsu there. I actually enjoyed Muay Thai better. I was like, which kind of combat sports do I like? But the kicks, I have some issues with my S1 and stuff, and doing years and years of CrossFit didn't help. And that rotation, like I literally had been doing it for a couple of weeks and was like really feeling good about it. And I did a barbell good morning one day and just locked me up. Yep. I was like, what the hell? Because I've been doing so much rotation, my body wasn't used to it.
Yep.
But in jiu-jitsu, I would roll with this guy called the Mountain. He was 6'10".
That's who you want to roll with, the Game of Thrones character.
Yeah, and he laid on my head, and like I couldn't turn my neck for a week. I was like, okay, jiu-jitsu just doesn't seem like, it seems like a lot of fun, but I need.
Yeah.
And I worked there, so I didn't get like the normal treatment of like a new person. They just kind of threw me in, and I'm also like, I was an athlete, so they're like, yeah, you'll figure it out. And I was like, dude, I need some help here.
Yeah, I did CrossFit for a while, and I went to jiu-jitsu, and I was like, all right. And I thought, I was like, I could hang, I'll be fine. And I started warming up in the gi alone, and I was like, oh, I'm tired already. Like I was doing CrossFit 5-6 days a week, and I literally was running in the gi, warming up, and I was like, oh, I'm tired already. This is a different level of fitness.
Yeah, it was funny, like with the Mountain, or I forget his real name. But
he doesn't need a real name. His nickname's the Mountain.
He's not like a thick guy, but he was 6'10", so he was like almost, he's like 270 some odd pounds.
Right.
But it was like once I started figuring things out, I did, and Curtis was watching, and Curtis is a black belt, And I did, like, just with sheer strength, just roll him over and get his back one time. And I was like, oh, I'm stronger than you. I'm like a lot stronger than you. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, but I did just roll you over and get your back, and you weigh 275 pounds.
Yeah, it's crazy how, like, especially in jiu-jitsu with, like, weight distribution, like my professors maybe 150, right? 155. I weigh 173 right now. But it's amazing how his 150 could feel like 250 easily with just like the weight distribution and like just proper posture and shit. And it's just crazy how like that's something that when I first walked in there, I was like, oh, this is different. Like this is gonna fuck me up. And it's funny because I've been thinking about Muay Thai because I'm like, all right, I kind of want to diversify things a little bit, but I just haven't stepped into that.
Yeah, I'm looking at high altitude here with some of those guys trained. I guess some of the UFC fighters train up here. I guess Brian Callen said something about it, and I was like, oh, and I looked it up, and it's not that far from my house because there's a tent planet here there's a tent planet just down the road. But if I'm gonna do it, I like to punch and kick things. That's more fun.
Yeah, I think I would enjoy Muay Thai, but I love jiu-jitsu. Like jiu-jitsu is probably like it made me like basically quit CrossFit because I was doing both, and I was like, all right, well, this is a bit much. Like, I don't need to be. And I was like, I'd rather do jujitsu. Plus, like the high impact of CrossFit kind of just wasn't sustainable for me anymore, you know?
Yeah. I had recently just started training a little bit more. So I had a coach, like Noah Olson and so Max Elhaj, their coach, was my coach back in the day, best coach I ever had. And I just re-signed. So I'm 34 years old now. And I was like, you know what? I've been trying for 3 years to like find a replacement for competitive CrossFit training. It just, nothing excites me as much. Even Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu and stuff, like just didn't get me like excited. So I was like, fuck it. So I went to their like group program. So I used to pay like $400 a month for him to be my coach back when I had
crazy.
And it was great. I mean, I was crushing. It was awesome. I mean, it was the only time I was like capable of making regionals as an individual. As a 6'4", 230-pound athlete, like that's not easy to do. There's not many of us out there. Most guys are like 5'9", 5'10", 200 pounds, you know?
Yep.
And so I started and I was looking through the programs. I was like, I could do the fitness one, which is actually pretty tough. And I was like, fuck it. And I just did the masters. So I signed up for the masters training. I'm like, now masters is 35. I'm like, really? I started weightlifting and stuff. And I was like in the 6th grade. So my training age is actually like, I'm older training wise than I am like by years.
Right. You have like, right. It's like dog years.
Exactly. And they talk about that a lot. Like your training age is different. Like if you start training at like 25, like you actually may have more longevity than somebody that started training at 15 because your body, like your connective tissue and stuff is just built different because you've been doing it a different way.
Right. You have like a different body awareness. See, like I like jiu-jitsu because it brings in a little bit more of like a mental element for me. Like I'm really big in like the cerebral heady space. So I like to get there, and the more I do it, the more awareness I get to it. And I'm like, okay, I start seeing things differently, whether it be like the professor's movements or my movements or whatever it is. So like, I just like the heady aspect of jiu-jitsu. Plus you just get like exhausted and, you know, obviously self-defense is always great. But for me, it's just really about the heady stuff. I just love getting into that space.
Well, dude, I can totally see that. It's like a puzzle. Like I rolled with Curtis at 10th Planet one time, just playing around, and I felt like the dude had 4 legs. I was like, how are your legs literally everywhere all the time? It was it was just for fun. He was just playing around with me, and I was just like, just to see what it was like, you know? And then I also had one of the fighters over there, like leg kick me at about 50% just to see what that felt like.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm the kind of the same mindset. Like, let's see what 50% of your max is like. So I'll roll my professor. I've been doing privates, and I'll be like, okay, right. And afterwards I'll like break down his role, and I'll be like, all right, so you started as like a mid-level blue, and then you got to like mid-level brown. And like, it's just, to me, the ability to like dial in at that frequency at like on demand, you know what I mean? Or if I put him in even close to a compromising position, which for me is like impossible, but if I even get him close to that, he just like turns on black belt status, and it's just like, see ya. I'm like, where the fuck, I was gonna, no, it's just
the thing.
right. It's amazing how quickly like they could just adapt to that. It's the same thing for like Muay Thai, any like high level elite athlete, like when you could just dial into that different level, it's to me, it's just remarkable.
Yeah, I love seeing that.
So how did you shift from that to like kind of more of the political mindset and kind of what you're doing now?
So dude, I started podcasting when I was at On It back in the day, and it was right towards the end of my time there. I started this podcast called the Pleasure Monkey Podcast, and it was supposed to be just like an entertainment show, but it turned into kind of like a personal development show. I also needed to make a living, so I like did that whole thing for like 5 years. And then I've always cared about politics. I mean, I would say in my adult life, I always cared, but I mean, growing up, I listened to like Rush Limbaugh and shit. Like,
did you?
Yeah, growing up, I was like aggressively pro-life, which was weird. It's just like it's like these weird things that like look back, but I was a child, you know. It's like if you're a virgin, you probably
you're 8 and you're like pro-life, like all right,
the liberals or whatever, like whatever Rush Limbaugh was saying. Who was just at this point, I look back at media and I'm like, he's an entertainer. Like he's
Sure.
like Alex Jones, you know, it's Sean Hannity. They're all the same as like, they're just being hyperbolic is beneficial in that environment. But that, and then I don't know, no one really knows much about this guy that's our age, but this guy, Paul Harvey, was on AM radio as well on the same channel as Rush Limbaugh. And he would like do these really intense kind of more philosophical approaches to different things. He was a great radio personality, but I really appreciated these guys on AM radio back when I was a kid. And after I shifted, you know, I had been caring about this stuff for a long time, and the Bernie Sanders movement kind of got me into politics even more. And I didn't really talk about it much, but I was very invested in it. And I'd spent years just kind of like looking into things, reading different books. And I had kind of gotten a little bit kind of over self-help, honestly, and personal development. It just wasn't exciting to me anymore. And I thought there were bigger conversations to be had. And I knew that with politics in particular, there's an approach to talking about those kind of things that most people don't have, right? Can you like overlay human behavior science on top of what is essentially a gigantic human behavior science experiment called the United States of America, or life, or just global politics in general, right? It's like, this is just people believing certain things, and that motivates their actions. So that's kind of the lens that I look at it through. And when COVID hit, my coaching business, which was where I made most of my money, that went away, because the biggest part of my coaching business was human interaction. Right. So my entire coaching business was predicated on people being able to go to work and go on dates and go be around their friends, and a lot of it was how they show up. And I coached a lot of women on really standing up for themselves at the end of the day. And that was really what I enjoyed doing, was like, listen, you may think that you're being a bitch by standing up for yourself, but you're so passive that what you think is being a bitch is actually just being assertive. Right. And you got to be able to switch that on, like things like that, and these different journaling practices and stuff. So I didn't feel genuine being able to sell that program anymore with COVID happening. So what that did was open up time. And my girlfriend and I, Kelly, had this business called Soulfire Productions, which you know about. And that was not making us much money at the time. I think I was making like $500 a month from Soulfire at that time. So I was like, well, I got to switch gears and do something here. So what I did was found a way to make what is now Politically Homeless beneficial for the business. So I used that as like an experimental testing ground to try out new media platforms for our podcasters and new content design, while I got a chance to do something I really wanted, I kind of had an urge to do anyways, and talk about politics. So I was kind of the guinea pig for a lot of the stuff we were doing with Soulfire, but also at the same time building a brand, which made it make sense because it wasn't making any money at first, but we learned a lot from it. So it was a nice investment of time. And with our team working on the video content and different things like that, it really helped me get into a place where I could do this thing. And now it has, you know, it's not like supplying my livelihood now, but Soulfire does really great. And this thing's growing, and it's been really fun to do.
Yeah, it's funny because the politically homeless aspect of things, I think, resonates with so many people, because all we're inundated by the extreme left, the extreme right. But I think it's to your point, there's a home for the people who don't subscribe to one or the other, who use more logic and are really thinking outside of the box, and don't want to just be like, yeah, I subscribe to this mentality, or I subscribe to that mentality. And they are somewhat in this gray area, which is kind of like this homeless state, where it's like, well, I believe in this aspect of the right, but I also kind of believe in this element of the left. So it leaves them in a place where it's like, how do I subscribe? How do I become a part of, I want to be a part of this, but without, signing my name to a contract on a dotted line on one side or the other.
Yeah. And more people care than most people think, right? Like more people care about politics and what's going on in the world. But if you don't have a home, right? If you don't have, like, if you're not a Democrat or a Republican, well, then you kind of are in a shitty spot, because there's so much. We are tribal creatures. And that's one of the things that when you think about bringing human behavior science into this, like that's where we are. We want groups. We want to be able to have conversations with people and feel like-minded. That's why churches work, right? It's all the same kind of psychological process. So when we look at that, and then you find, that's why I thought this was so important, because I'm kind of a lefty, right? Like I call myself a libertarian socialist. It's like, I think unions are great in the private sector, and I also like guns. It's like there's a weird, weird situation. I'm like, I argue both sides, which actually makes it really hard to grow an audience. But the audience that I have grown in the past several months has been really cool, really cool. And it's also because I take this kind of middle ground approach and really call out both sides. That's what I enjoy doing the most. I mean, when this started, I was just kind of like making fun of political ads because we were going through an election and they're just absurd.
Sure.
It's just like pure propaganda.
Yeah.
Calling out both sides, you'll see somebody like I was in this like long, which I don't know why I get in these, but I end up getting these long like Instagram comment fights with people that don't have a private profile. And they're like, I don't understand how you're the voice of reason. I'm like, well, what is reason to you? Right.
Right.
Like blind allegiance to your ideology. Like that's not reason. That's delusion. Right. So to think that like, it's like, I don't want to have to work with Republicans on anything. They're all racist. I'm like, well, no, that's not how that works. And like a healthy balance is really important. We can see what's happening in California right now. That's what happens when the other party, regardless of what it is, has zero chance of winning elections. Right. Is you don't have anybody to hold you to account. You don't have any competition within your political system. So one ideology runs away with it, and that creates an imbalance that creates instability. And that's not a good thing either. You know, I don't agree with most things that conservatives are about, right? I think that their allegiance to like religion and them getting so triggered by things like Satan shoes, like conservatives get trolled. It's so reliable. I'm actually talking about this on the show today. We've got like the Dr. Seuss thing and then like the Lil Nas X Satan shoe thing. It's like, do you understand that the Dr. Seuss, that was a big part, right? That was the family of Dr. Seuss who decided to cancel the production of 3 of his lowest selling books. And it caused a media storm that sold millions of books.
Right.
Like they trolled the right and made a shit ton of money.
Right.
The same thing's happening with Lil Nas X right now and the Satan shoe and the whole thing. It's like he did a thing. He made 666 shoes and everybody's mad because they loved listening to that shitty Old Town Road song.
Right.
Everybody's mad about it now because he like did give Satan a lap dance in a video. It's like, you understand that those shoes now, because you guys were outraged, are now worth $10,000 instead of $1,000. You got trolled. Like you got to understand, conservatives, you are it's very financially beneficial to people to troll you because you get outraged. And then Ben Shapiro's talking about it. And things like Cardi B and WAP, I didn't even know what that song was until Ben Shapiro talked about it. Like it's great. It's so funny because now they're all butthurt about it and they're all sensitive. And it's like, it makes it more fun to like, because y'all hate it so much.
Right. And it's funny because I didn't know what with WAP was either. And my wife was like, have you heard this song? I'm like, I heard of it. I didn't actually hear it. And then she played it for me and I was hysterical laughing. I was like, this is the greatest song ever. This song is ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. And I understand I could empathize and sympathize with people that want to keep a moral fiber in certain things and want to keep traditions alive. And it does become a checks and balances system that when you let these things start to spiral out of control, so to speak, it becomes, there's a momentum behind it. But at the same time, to your point, you're not recognizing that by putting in all this effort against it, you're actually adding fuel to the fire. Like my daughter loves Old Town Road. She dances to it on Just Dance all the time. She's 6. Like, I'm not going to let her watch the most recent video, but let her enjoy the song because people are outraged. I think if I'm not mistaken, he was like #1 on country billboards. And then they were like, well, he's not country, it's rap. And they were like, well, whatever. And then what's his name jumped on the song with him and like, well, now it's country. I can't think of his name now. It's escaping me, but it's now a country song. And it's just like, the more you lean into this idea of cancel culture and being frustrated, the more you're adding fuel to it. And you're actually creating more of a buzz around it, which is actually monetizing all this stuff.
Exactly. And it creates this air. And this is something that conservatives just tend to not understand. That just annoys me to death. Is like, by making something off limits, you make it more enticing for people who don't like you, which is a lot of people, right? There's a lot of people who don't like it. It's the equivalent of abstinence only education for a society. And the same thing for the left, right? By canceling journalists, they just move to Substack and make more money, right? Like it doesn't, they're good, like Matt Taibbi or Glenn Greenwald, who are like, you have Glenn Greenwald, who one of his biggest struggles in life, he was also somebody who exposed, one of the primary journalists that exposed the WikiLeaks, WikiLeaks situation.
Right.
And worked with Snowden and these guys. No, it was the Snowden stuff, not WikiLeaks, excuse me. But you have him who's a gay man, who's married, who lives in Brazil, right? And he'll write an issue like saying maybe 7-year-olds shouldn't decide their gender and have gender reassignment surgery. Now he's a transphobe. It's like, this guy's been a pioneer for the LGBT community for 30 years. Like, what are you talking about here? And it's like, he's uncancelable, right? And you have people like Kansas Owens who are quote unquote uncancelable, but they're more like outrage porn, whereas somebody like him is bringing substance and is exposed some egregious unconstitutional behavior on our own federal government. But you have tattletale journalists who want to cancel the guy because he doesn't agree with their ideology. It's a weird world we live in with this stuff.
It's very weird. It's Billy Ray Cyrus, by the way. I couldn't think of it, but I got it. Billy Ray Cyrus hopped on the track with them. But it's exactly that. And people find outrage, and you can find outrage in anything. But the minute people kind of stand up for whatever they believe in or voice their opinion on things, it's an automatic cancel culture. This is wrong. And here's a question I want to throw out to you. Do you think that these things are done in a genuine attempt to make things better? Or do you think that there's like something going on behind the scenes as well? Like, a part of me wants to believe that these extreme behaviors, like whether it be canceling Dr. Seuss or outrage against, Lil Nas X's sneakers or video, a part of me wants to subscribe to the idea that this mindset shift is genuine and really is about creating a healthier culture. But then there's also this other side of me. It's like, no, there's something else going on here that's just pure. It's like childlike behavior.
Yeah, that's a good question, man. And I wish there was like a straight answer to that, because one of the ways that I look at this thing is sometimes things don't add up, right? And a lot of things now don't add up. I'm not going to say that Alex Jones is 100% right. I'm obviously not going to say that QAnon was onto something here, but like, things are odd and they aren't really making a lot of sense. And I think that people default to what they find safe. And I think what we're looking at here, especially when you think about from the right, conservatives in general, they're watching their values and way of life become less and less valuable to the majority of people. Right? Like Christian conservative values have become less and less important to people.
Sure.
They've been challenged. I mean, you think about, like, it wasn't that you and I were almost adults by the time that gay marriage was legal, right? And
Sure.
how far things come from that. They're also seeing everything that they thought they had warned people about gender not mattering and the fight for the soul of the nation, like that stuff to them is very, very real. And they haven't allowed themselves to evolve. And then on the left, you have people seeing the massive inequality, right?
Right.
And what they value seems to be not respected at all. So you have these people that are both, if you're in those camps, very resentful of the reality that is in front of them, and both trying to change it in completely different ways. One trying to think what they say is progress, right? And one trying to go back to what was better for them. And both are delusional, right? They're both right and they're both wrong. But it's challenging when you have two completely different outlooks on the world. And that's one thing I love about having conversations with conservatives, is because we'll have these conversations and we'll get to a point where the conversation ends and we just have to agree that we view the world very differently. And it's philosophical at that point. It's not factual. I can't sit here and be like, like Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings, but he does select the facts that align with his feelings. Right.
I mean?
It's
right.
like,
and you're spot on with that. And I think that's and that's the gray area, right? Like when you see the moral fiber of the country starting to slip through the cracks, there is something that is intrinsically American or patriotic about that, whatever it may be, wherever you align. There are certain, it's like having a coloring book or a blank piece of paper, right? You could color the sun any color you want, but you still need the order and you still need the outline of the picture. If you just have a blank canvas, which is beautiful, don't get me wrong, it's beautiful to have a blank canvas, you're just going to splatter everywhere, right? You could create your own lines, but for the most part, it's almost too much freedom. Where if you have a coloring book, if you will, you can color the sun green and the grass yellow, but you still need the constraints of the book. And I think that's what we're coming up against a lot in the political spectrum, is that you do have these moral fibers, these moral integrity that let's kind of align throughout the country for its history. And now we are coming up against the time where those things are being not only challenged, but kind of torn apart to some degree. Yeah. And a lot of people have an issue with that. And you can understand that, right? But at the other side of the spectrum, you do have people that are trying to create progress, which is a beautiful thing, because you can't just stay within these confines. You need to grow and change mindsets. But the extreme routes that both sides are taking is where everything's kind of falling apart.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. And I like that coloring book analogy as well. And I'm a big Jordan Peterson fan, which most people on the left hate this guy. I love him to death. But
Sure.
this idea of chaos and order, right? And I think if you look at your life, like anybody's life, like going into a new thing is considered chaos. Like dating is chaos, right? There's just like a lot of uncertainty and a lot of sorting things out. And I think as a nation, we've dipped into this chaos that some different kind of order will come out of, right? It's like we have order and chaos, order and chaos. Like you have these fluctuations. And a lot of times the weird thing is war creates stability within the nation oftentimes if you're actually fighting someone. Not like the wars we have now where we're like, it's a song and dance and we have 800 military bases all over the world and now we're scared of China. So that justifies a lot of other actions. Like that's not real. That's like fake war. But when you have like, that's weird how that tends to happen. But I think there's going to be some kind of new order that comes out of this in the next 10 years or so that is probably better. But what we're seeing now is like the pendulum swinging so hard. And I think the reason it's swinging so hard to the left and why conservatives are generally so upset is because they've owned the narrative since the Nixon era, right? With the exception of JFK, who didn't even get a full term in because he got shot in the face by the CIA. But it's
I'll just leave that right there for you.
I got to slide that in for you. But no, we have this situation where now people are so frustrated with the fact that conservatives have run the conversation and we've had the impacts of trickle down economics, which does not work, right? We're seeing what that is now. Like the plan that they had, that Reagan had, has worked, and this is where we're at now. So we need to switch something. That's why I was such a big Bernie Sanders supporter. Not that I agreed with everything that he did, but I thought that if he implemented as much as he could in 4 or 8 years, and then you get another conservative in there, which is something that most people don't think. It's like, well, it'd be better if Democrats were presidents forever. And I'm like, well, maybe not, right? Maybe you have a Bernie Sanders in there that shifts some things up, holds pharmaceutical companies accountable, changes the way our medical system works and makes it more affordable for people, gets rid of the monopolies, right? Does some things and probably raises taxes in the meantime. But in the next term would surely swing back to conservative. They would lower taxes. And then you'd end up in 20 or 40 years, you'd end up in a way better place. But people don't like to think about that. They think about it in 4-year terms. Like if we don't do what we need to do in this 4-year period, the whole world's going to collapse. And you see the way that's manipulated with the border crisis, for example. Now all of a sudden conservatives care about how Mexican immigrants are treated. Like right. And you know, I look at this thing and it's one of the things where even on my show, I talk about this, like I'm not taking the bait, right? I don't know the kind of desperation it takes for someone to need to put all their belongings in a backpack and try and hop over a river to come live somewhere where they may have a better chance for their family. I don't know what it's like for a mother in Honduras to send her 9-year-old child through Mexico on foot because they think that Biden isn't deporting people. I don't have any context on what that feels like to live that existence. And what Biden said in his presser the other day that everybody's kind of making fun of was like, I'm not going to leave those people on the Mexican side of the Rio Grande in the mud without food. And I'm like, you know what? If he needs to put them in an event center in San Diego, like, so be it. I can't imagine treating people that way. You know, now we can have a conversation about what Biden's actions have done with drone strikes in the Middle East and Trump and Obama and everybody else. Like, do you really care that much about innocent people, given that drone strikes kill about 80% innocent people? We can have that conversation, but this is very real to us because we share a border with Mexico. And it's hard to see those people live that life and have to live that reality. And it makes sense that a lot of those people are resentful towards us, right? If you hear people that are, like, let's think about the cartels, for example, they resent the shit out of us. They have no problem sending fentanyl into this country because we have so much and they have so little, and we're geographically neighbors. Right. You know what I mean? It's an odd place to be. So we've got to take all those components into our decision making as opposed to just like, what does my ideology tell me to think?
Well, I think I want to go back to the Jordan Peterson thing and the chaos and the order. And I think what you could kind of extrapolate from that also is the micro and the macro, right? Like we see things on a very micro level. I was having this conversation with someone the other day where, you know, we see things like, oh, well, if there's a God, why do kids get cancer? Why do bad things happen to good people? And it's like, that's you have a point in saying that on a microscopic scale and level, but you have to zoom out. Like you have to zoom out to the macro element of things. And again, I think that there's good intention behind both sides of things, right? There's a good intention on a micro level, right? But when you zoom out to the macro and you start to put all the pieces to the puzzle, you realize you do need the chaos in the order of both sides of these things to find a healthy balance and a healthy flow. But we're so polarized, and obviously you have so much money in the polarization of people. There's so much money being made on such a higher tier that we're looking up and like you can't even see the tower. You can't even see through the clouds of it all. So you're just like, well, I can't see all the way up there, so I'm going to handle what's down here. And everyone's fighting amongst each other. Where if people recognize themselves of actually probably agreeing on more than they disagree on, we would come to the table with more agreeable terms, and we'd actually would have progress rather than just be Twitter arguing each other all the time.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like we live in very different realities. And that's one of the reasons I feel like I almost had a responsibility to do what I do, is because I grew up in a small conservative Texas town, right? Bible Belt, Texas town. It had 9,000 people. Yeah, exactly. I grew up working oil and gas construction. I was swinging a hammer at 10 years old. Like that's just what I grew up in. And then I moved to Austin, which is like the liberal hub of Texas, and had a completely different reality, right? So I got to see and feel and experience both of those realities. And I lived in LA for a little while, in San Diego. Like I've been around. And now I live in Denver. So I like live in these like more liberal cities now, but I still grew up in a place where that was their reality. And to be honest with you, there's like 7 Black people in the town. So when people are talking about Black Lives Matter and they're saying all lives matter, they don't experience the same stuff. They haven't seen the things that we've seen in these in cities, right? It's a different reality. And one of the things that I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and I had struggled with this with my mom because I would argue with her about Christianity all the time. Right. And I was like, and I'm more like Buddhist leaning, and that's my thing. And it makes a lot more sense to me.
Sure.
Yeah. We both have them right behind us here. But I had this realization, I think it was actually on mushrooms, where I was kind of thinking about this. It was like,
always psilocybin.
Yeah. They snap you out of it. Right. And I was like, who benefits from her changing her mind? If she decided to just believe everything I believe about religion and dogma and yada, 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 and she just became a Buddhist, like, does that really improve the quality of her life? Because if she does that, she now loses her friend group, her community, her structure in life, her belief system. She goes into an existential crisis. Like, so for me to try and change her mind is really just me wanting to feel right. It's not about her having a better life. And that changed everything. And I think about that with politics too. I had this with one of the people in my Patreon was asking about, like, they were in a relationship where their girlfriend is really mad about the fact that his family is conservative. And I was like, ask her, would it benefit their life to believe what you believe? And if not, then they have no incentive. And if there are areas where it would change their life to benefit to believe what you believe, then focus on those areas. But even then, it's not your responsibility. And even then, you're not them, so you don't know their subjective experience.
Right. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe in Buddhist religion, it's a sin to kind of force someone onto the path, right? It's considered like a sin to make someone or force them onto the path of, we would say, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. But I agree and I disagree with in the fact that there are avenues of religion, especially like Christianity. And I come from a Catholic household, New York, like Italian, like you could put the pieces of the puzzle together. So I come from that structure and that mindset. And I agree with you to an extent where if it's going to, create a detriment to someone's life, then yes. But I think that we subscribe to religion the same way we subscribe to any structure or foundation, whether it be politics, religion, and we become jaded, and we also become so focused on being right and that being fact, and whether it be Adam and Eve or whatever it is, and these become our identities, right? And we don't know how to break outside of that identity, where something like you went through, or my own growth and development, has allowed me to see that for what it is, and reframe or shift my perspective, still with the essence of what religion's providing, right? But without the structure and the labels and the names. And when I was able to do that, and whether it be go to church or whatever it was, I was having a way more impactful experience than when I was like Catholic school, God in the sky, and Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark. Like, I was having a way better experience intrinsically. So I think that, yes, the conversation doesn't need to happen if it's going to shatter someone's life. But I think that the conversation is so beneficial to have because it does seep in an essence rather than a rigid structure.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually don't agree, 'cause that's the exact approach I took, right? It wasn't like just believe what you want to believe. It was, I would challenge her on areas where I thought she could be moved that would actually help her have a better relationship with her own religion, right? So one of the things, we had this conversation over margaritas, and I was like, okay, within Buddhism, right? It doesn't really matter if the stories are true. It's not the point. The point isn't the stories being true. That's one thing that where Buddhism and Christian are different. Like, some of those stories definitely are true, but they're all, they're embellished and they're fables. They're meant to be that way. They have a moral to the story.
It's
That's the point.
Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's Dr. Seuss. Exactly. Like, did the Buddha really stop an elephant that was charging through a city by just his vibes?
The
Like,
force.
maybe not. Yeah, with the force. Maybe not, right? Did he sit under the Bodhi tree for all that time? Maybe not, right? It doesn't matter. That's not the point. And what I'd had a conversation with her about that was very challenging, but I felt really helped, was, what if Jesus wasn't literally the Son of God? Like, how much would that change? And can you detach from that belief system? And just questioning that, like, what would that change about the way I believe things, actually gives you a completely different lens to look at the religion through. Because then you start looking at things not as fact, right? Not with certainty, but with curiosity. And you get to, when you look at things through a lens of curiosity, I feel that you can take more away from them, or at least a different perspective away from the same stories. And I think sometimes I wish people would treat Christianity more like Buddhists treat Buddhism, right? Which is a little bit of a completely different framework that aligns with certain people. But some people find comfort in certainty, which I think is kind of cognitive weakness, in my opinion, if I was going to be judgy. But I'm allergic to certainty. I don't believe that their certainty is it's limiting. And to not be able to question your own belief systems is limiting as well. So with that kind of thing, I took the approach of that direction, but I also do the same thing with politics, right? Especially with things that are really touchy, like abortion and guns. Right?
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's like, well, think about this, right? Think about it this way. And that's really what even my show is, more like a perspective sharing than it is me telling anybody how to think or what to think. That's not really what it is. It's like, take this information and my perspective, which is very much my opinion and subjective, and maybe infuse it with what you think, and maybe you make some progress just by hearing someone that's doing their best to speak to you in a language that you can understand, which a lot of people don't do.
Right. And I love what you said there in regards to the facts around the story, right? And that kind of leaks into the political world too, right? So where, we could take things as face value, right? And just take them for what they are. Or we can kind of, like you said, question ourselves and question our own mindset, question our thought, and also question what's behind it, right? Question the people, the timeline, the how long the duration of time has gone over thousands of years that these stories have been told. And you could extrapolate the essence out of it, or you could extrapolate the facts out of it, air quote for those listening, the facts out of it. And that's something that to your point, in a Buddhist religion or a Buddhist mindset, it's the essence of the story that the message of the story that you're supposed to take away, not whether it happened or not. And sitting under the Bodhi tree for X amount of time could be no different than laying in a meditation for some people for 5 minutes. That 5 minutes could feel like years, right? Going to a sensory deprivation tank and sitting there for 2 hours, and that 2 hours will come and go in the weirdest of ways. You're like, have I been here for 5 minutes or an hour and a half? What is time? Does time even matter? Well, time's a man-made constraint. So it doesn't really matter if I've been here and where do I have to go? Why am I rushing through time? So when you can break outside of that mindset and you allow yourself to become curious, then you do open up all these other avenues for possibility. And it's to your point of, yeah, you could stay in that comfort and that convenience and that constraint, or you can break outside of that and really start to question what you've learned, what you know, and what you potentially could know.
Exactly, 100%. Man, it's so funny how float tanks would, like, after an hour for me, your mind just starts playing all kinds of tricks on you about time. Like, that's the funny. An hour doesn't do that much. An hour, I'm just like, it's very relaxing. 2 hours is the move, though. Because after about an hour and a half, like, it just feels weird. And it's
an hour and a half is where that's the max I've done, but I've done it so many times that, like, I'm kind of able to, I think the traditional is like 40 minutes to get your body settled, where I'm kind of able to kind of just due to meditation practices and doing it so consistently, I'm able to kind of break through and let the dust settle a little bit quicker, I think. But yeah, that hour and a half or that hour, like hours, like, okay, good. I just like an hour gets you to the curtain. an hour and a half, you poke your head through a little bit, but then like 2 hours, you're just like, what the fuck is going on this side of things?
Yeah, it's one of those things where all of a sudden the lights kind of start turning on. That's the float tanks I go to. Like they turn on really slow, and you're like, "Oh, wait, what? Are we done?"
Yeah. Or you'll think that you're still in the tank and you're hallucinating that. Like, am I seeing this? Is this like maybe this is part of the float? Maybe I'm still in the tank, but
Yeah,
no, it's
exactly.
not.
And it's fun. There's more people that are into that kind of thing now, where there is this lack of attachment to certainty. And I think that to think about religion as kind of this framework, and people talk about it a lot as a moral framework for our country, but to me, adhering to that dogma is it sets you if you especially at a young age, right? And this really upset me about like going to church with a mom and I haven't gone back because her preacher I just don't like it all. Yeah, he said one time that you don't deserve God's love unless you accept Jesus. I was like, dude, come on. Like,
right.
Let's pump the brakes on that. Like, I wanted to raise my hand and be like, can we not do that? And this is the song the kids were singing. Right. And the songs the kids were singing were like all of the like mystical, he came from heaven to earth thing. And I was like, could you sing songs about like the moral of the story, please, and get to that thing? But I think that allegiance to the unknown, right? Because at the end of the day, you can be religious, no judgment either way, but you really just don't know, right? When the lights go out and you're dead, we're all going to be surprised at what happens. It may be something, it may be nothing. I think it's probably something that I don't understand, but I've also seen various altered states of consciousness that would lead me to believe there's more to this than what I know, right?
Sure.
But I could just be my imagination, right? Like, who knows?
Yeah, and I'm open to like I'll explain floating to my mom, or I'll explain floating to anybody, and I'll have these, or even deep meditation experiences that are almost movie or story like, and I've shared them before, and I'm open to the idea that this is just my mind scratching and clawing for something to resonate with, right? But I'm also open to the idea that this is something that's bigger than me and deeper than me, but also is within me, right? And is also out there. So I'm open to both, and I don't think I'm right in either way, and there is no way to knowing, right? It is a blind allegiance, and whether it be religion or politics, there is ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't know what is going on, and there is a part of it that is just blind allegiance.
Yeah, and neurons that fire together wire together, right? So if you are at a young age conditioned to believe in something and make that belief your identity, you're much more likely to do the same thing with other stuff later on in life, like politics, or like So it's like there's quite a through line there as far as just the way the mind works. And that to me that's interesting to me, right? And that's a great way to challenge people. And I think that actually provides productive conversations. But when you're looking at what we have now, which is a much more secular society on the whole, you have a lot of this like kind of chaos that comes out of that, and people seeing things that they didn't see before because they weren't kind of shielded by ideology. And that's scary to a lot of people. That is really scary. And it's scary to people who aren't even religious. This isn't necessarily just about religion. That's more of like a primer for creating a identity out of your own belief systems. But when we look at the whole thing, it's like you can see how it's unsettling to people, right? And then you have a outrage, a corporate outrage machine, right? In Fox News and MSNBC that is now, went from being 8th, 9th, and 10th on cable news to during the Trump era being 1, 2, and 3 in cable news, and their ratings going up in prime time by 200%. And now they're addicted to outrage, even more so than they were before.
Well, their bank accounts are addicted to outrage, right? And the wallets are addicted to outrage. And I try to do when I'm watching TV, which I barely watch any TV with my wife. If I decide to go into the world of the news, which I barely do, right? Probably to a fault, but I barely do. I just do my due diligence and go back and forth, and I go, okay, what are they saying? Okay, and what are they saying? And I go, well, I don't agree with that. I do agree with that. And no, they seem wrong here. And that's just me, right? That's just, and I go, but I know people who will turn on Fox and that's all they'll have on, right? And that's a part of your diet, right? That is a part of what you're consuming, whether you recognize it or not. It's not just the grilled chicken and the broccoli in front of you that's going to create a healthier lifestyle. It's what you're consuming. And if you're consuming the Kardashians, which I have no problem with the Kardashians, good for them. They're doing their thing. They've created a model and they're doing awesome. But there is something to the Real Housewives or whatever it is you're consuming. That's still part of your diet, right? And that is that is planting little seeds in your brain somewhere, the same way religion does, the same way politics does. And that is shifting the way you think. And that is shifting and creating, to your point, identities of who you are and how you show up in the world. And then it becomes a whole nother interaction element that is, for the most part, it's just too much information, oversaturation of the brain, and how to compartmentalize these things becomes, very, very choppy waters.
Yeah, 100%. That's what, dude, honestly, as weird as it is, I advocate this for people, even when I talk about politics. It was a big part of my personal development kind of journey and in my coaching practice. But just taking all those thoughts and putting them down in a journal every day is a game. You got to be able to see those thoughts. If you can see what's going on in your head, and you can start to kind of, unconscious bias is a big term now, but like everybody has confirmation bias, right? And confirmation bias is essential to survive. We developed that evolutionarily for a reason. And just like things like jealousy and other things that are very important for our survival, they can run the show. And if confirmation bias is the way that if you look at the whole world just trying to confirm what you already believe, you're fucked. Like you're just not going to be a developed human being. And you got to be able to put that in check and know, like, okay, I want to believe this, but can I be critical and objective about it, even knowing that I want to believe this is true, right? I'm a pretty, at this point, and I wasn't like this at the beginning of COVID, but I'm pretty like anti-lockdown, right? I'm really frustrated with the way this has gone on, and where the data's at. But I have to be careful, right? I'm bringing an article up on the show today about the efficacy of lockdowns and how they've actually caused more deaths. And I was in my head so hard reading that article, just being like, be critical. You do not, there's so much of you does not want to even criticize this data at all, because you want to believe this to be true, and you just got to be on top of that. But that's not an easy place to be, and it takes a lot of practice to get there, where you can really like be hard on yourself as if you're in an internal debate with your own mind half the time.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
It definitely is. And if you want to subscribe to a narrative, or you want to subscribe to your own bias, you will see that in the world. And that is all you will see. If that's what you want to be programmed to recognize, you'll see it in every walk of life, just to get confirmation of your own identity. And it really does take a lot of effort and time and energy to break outside of your own belief system, and to think like, well, like, again, to the point of, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I don't know everything. And there's something that, you could do on day-to-day practices, whether it be jujitsu or meditation, or just a diligent practice of something that sucks, cold showers. Like, I've been having this conversation a lot with people, is it's like, do the things that, like, force yourself to do shit that sucks on a regular basis, and you'll be able to break through. Like last night, I've been doing this version of Murph, which has been a mile bike ride, 100 push-ups, 200 squats, 300 sit-ups, and another mile bike ride, right? On the stationary bike. And I want to do it for 30 days. And I'm on day 7. And last night at 8:00, when I put the kids to bed, I was like, the last thing I want to do right now is go do this workout. It is the last fucking thing I want to do. But I went downstairs and I just started on the bike. And it's these micro steps that we can make for an ultimate bigger improvement, right? I know that it's long-term beneficial. A, I set out a goal. B, it's small daily steps I'm going to take towards that goal. But if you could take that and apply it to other avenues of your life, especially whether it be self-development or politics or religion, and critique the narrator in your own mind, and realize, I'm not just these thoughts, I'm not just this mindset, I'm the other side of this stone as well. And you could, I don't want to say lean into, but you could find that balance of those two, which, God bless you if you can, you'll just become, I think, happier and healthier.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you there. And this is why I love Sam Harris so much. Again, like, I like these people on the what do they call it? The intellectual dark web.
Yeah.
But like Sam Harris, for example, with the book Free Will and his take on free will and the limitations that exist within free will. I buy that, right? But it also gives me, to me, that people are like, well, that's, so reductionist and it takes away freedom. I'm like, I actually feel like it gives me more freedom, because I'm not living a naive life of that my actions are fully my own. Right? Like, there's all kinds of choices. Like, why did I not walk to the coffee shop today, which I normally would do, and I made my coffee at home? I had the free will to choose, but why one versus the other, right? And there's these different processes there. And like, how much I think that there's, what I talked about when I was a coach a lot was experience and expression. Like, to me, you cannot make adequate choices without context. if something does not occur to you to be chosen, you cannot choose that thing. And the only way you learn what you have the option to choose is through experience and gaining context. It's one of the reasons I'm like, date a bunch of different types of people. When I was coaching people, I'd be talking to people about the fact that they've dated the same person with a different name for the past 20 years. Like
Right.
it clearly hasn't worked. So maybe try something different. And it's like, oh, well, I just really dated the person that my mom wanted me to marry for the past 20 years. Maybe I should try something else and see what's up. Maybe my values are skewed there. And the dating thing is always fun because it's kind of like our human interaction under a microscope. But I think when we look at this thing and we allow ourselves to be challenged, it's why I love the flat earth stuff.
Sure.
Right? Like, take 5 minutes and really look at what these people believe and like entertain the idea of the earth being flat, which is a great something that to be false, and you've also known your whole life, but just try and make yourself believe it just to see what it feels like. It's funny. It's fun. You start to have fun with it.
I'll go down that rabbit hole and I'll be like I'll go to well, maybe all the photos are not real. Like, it's like, and I'll stop there. And I'm like, all right, calm down. But like, go further, like, and then try to believe that thing. Like, that's a really hard shift to have. But that's what we're also seeing in the political spectrum, where it's almost like the Democrats have become the Republicans and the Republicans have become the Democrats. When you reverse the timeline and the history of the two parties, they really have flip-flop positions, but not to the knowledge of the people. The people just keep on subscribing to this mindset of, okay, well, and it's slowly they're just replacing each other. And that's why it's so ridiculous, because if you would have rewound time and just put the same players in place and the same pieces in the puzzle, you wouldn't know the difference. Like, it's like when they do like those word in the street things. They're like, hey, did you know that, or they'll give a Republican's policy or something, and it's under a Democratic name or whatever it is. And they ask people these questions that are really behind the scenes, and they're like, oh yeah, no, Obama's great for this reason. It's like, well, that's actually a Trump thing. And you're like, oh, well, just because the name's attached to it. And that's what's happening, right? We're seeing that flip-flop of culture. And again, at the essence of it all, I think most people do agree on most things. But when we start to polarize and big business and big money's being made on the separation of the people, it's you have to start questioning things. And you have to start, start with flat earth. Sure. Start with that.
Just play with it. Have a good, and that's the thing is and that's people are like, man, is it hard to deal with this stuff all the time? And it is actually. I mean, last week was really rough because it was those 2 shootings and I had to talk about that. And I had to speaking up about gun reform is not, that's a challenging thing to discuss. I'm trying to do it in a way that's acceptable to both sides.
And respectful.
The logical end conclusion of this is when it comes to gun reform is going to make both sides unhappy. And that's probably the way it should be. Right. But I also get frustrated that the people that claim to know the most aren't taking responsibility. Right. If this is your area of expertise, then you need to take responsibility on making some kind of changes. And the changes aren't what the NRA says, which is just more people having guns. Right. Like that sounds idiotic. And maybe that does help in some ways if people are driven to that. But just like having everybody carry is not really an equitable solution, in my opinion. And that's also a responsibility many people don't have, or don't want to have. So when you get into touchy things like that, it's really tough to try and get in there, and that can be really draining. But most of the time I have such low expectations of the federal government that I don't really I'm not surprised by much, right? Even this vaccine passport thing, I'm like, are we for real talking about this? Are they going to allow the private sector to do this? And then you have somebody like Ron DeSantis speaking up, which I'm glad these conservatives exist, because if not, we'd all be worried about vaccine passports. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm not getting the vaccine. If you need to get it, that's great. If you feel like it's appropriate for you, great. I'm just not doing it. I'm a minimal interventionist. I don't, I've denied 4 or 5 surgeries I was supposed to have and done physical therapy instead with great results. I don't take many pharmaceutical drugs. I don't take a flu shot. That's just the way I choose to live my life. And to say that I can't go to a concert because I didn't do what they wanted me to do, to me is a little bit, you're crossing a line there. And many lines have been crossed, but that kind of stuff can become heavy. But generally speaking, the level of fuckery that exists, once you're in the know of it, you lose a lot of faith, which actually makes it a little more fun in a weird way.
Well, you see, the key thing is your expectation, right? And if you could adjust your level of expectation, right? It's like when it's kind of like when everyone was getting busted for steroids in Major League Baseball, right? It was kind of like I was like in 7th grade. I was so into the Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa home run race, right? I was just so into it, and then obviously everything came out and all this stuff, and probably if you would have told me in was it 97? I guess that was 90, yeah, 97, 98. If you would have told the little kid that all this was going on, I would have been like so disappointed, right? Like, what do you mean these people aren't human monsters, right? But then as I got older, I was like, who gives a fuck? Like, who cares if they were on steroids? Who cares who comes out, right? That they were on steroids. Like, there was like, especially in baseball, and it goes to like the same micro of the macro of the country, right? It's like there's this solace and this renowned feeling with baseball. It's America's pastime. It's so pure, and it's hot dogs and American and apple pie and 4th of July, right? And there's something so warm and beautiful behind that. But then it's like, yeah, they're taking PEDs and they're on fucking juice and they're and like, there's a dark side to that too, right? And unless you could shift your expectations of that, right? It was like, well, if Derek Jeter came out and said he did steroids, I wouldn't give a shit, right? Like, who would care at this point, right? But unless you could break outside of your expectations of things and question those things, you are going to be hurt by all of it. You're going to get upset because it's going to wreck your identity and your ego and your relationship with that.
Yeah, and it's also think about the way that was manipulated, right? Like, I always think about this with PEDs and in professional sports. First off, that's that person's job, right? Do you really care if your accountant does Adderall because it makes them a better accountant?
No, I want him to.
No, exactly. Like, you want to get them on Provisual. You know what I'm saying? But we want these people to be freak beasts, but we want them to do it within the confines of like purity culture. And I'm like, in the NFL, for example. And I've taken testosterone. I think testosterone is great. I'm going through fertility stuff right now because we're going to try to have a kid next year, so I can't be on it. But as soon as and I've been off for like 4 years now. But when I was a competitive athlete, it's like, listen, this is what we do. You know what I mean? Like, I feel better. I sleep better. My joints feel better. I'm doing things that are not healthy for me anyways. The training isn't what's unhealthy. I mean, the testosterone is not what's unhealthy. The training is like, training for 4 hours a day is hard. And we want a 400-pound, offensive lineman to run a 4.8 40 and play football for 20 years. Like, you don't do that. That's not a thing that humans are able to do. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And with Mark McGwire, like, I actually got to see him. I was front row at a Rangers game, and I was about the same age. And I watched this dude. It turned foul right at the very end, like right on the outside of the foul pole. But I saw this dude hit a rope into the third deck, and I was like, that is a freak beast of a human. Oh, yeah. Like, I'd never seen somebody hit a baseball that hard. It was insane. And he was mad. I think he was like 3 home runs away from breaking the record. So we were all like excited that he was going to like crank off 4 home runs in one game.
It was possible. It was certainly possible.
But he was warming up. We were on the visitor side. So he was in the on deck circle right in front of us. And I remember being like a 13-year-old kid, just like having butterflies at this guy that was right there, that was kind of a hero because I was a big fat kid that could hit a baseball a really long way. So like, I identified with that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it was, but it can tear you down. But that's, again, it's like, that's the early outrage culture, right? Like, you don't seek to understand what testosterone does or what, human growth hormone does, or that this is these people's job and their livelihood. And if they can play an extra 3 or 4 years because of human growth hormone, well, that's several $1 million for their family after they're dead, Yeah. And that's like, that's a big part of their legacy. It's like, dude, it's their job. We're not talking about college football anymore. We're talking about, this is their job.
Right.
So get off their back about using testosterone and growth hormone.
And also recognize that we have a shelf life, right? Like, we have an expiration date. And if you could prolong that, whether it be your career or your actual life, right, you're going to take up that opportunity no matter what it costs you, right? For the most part. And unless you're in that person's shoes, and I'm not at all an athlete, but just from being a guy who's doing Murph for the next 30 days and does jujitsu twice a week, I could tell you, if someone came to be like, hey, listen, I got this thing, it's going to make you recover faster. It's going to make you feel a little bit better. It's going to help you sleep better. That tight hip you're feeling, you're not going to feel that anymore. That shoulder that's bothering you, gone. I'd be like, yeah, sign me up. Let's go. Where is it? And that's just like every day, being a father of 2 and a husband. And that's just everyday living life, right? You want the edge. And if you could find the edge in some way, shape, or form, you're going to take it to some capacity, right? Where that moral fiber lies and where that gray area is, that's dependent on the person. But again, it's their career, it's their job, it's millions of dollars difference. So fuck yeah, they're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, think about this: if you are in the off season between the college level and the professional level, and you've got that 8-month period off, and the difference between you getting a $500,000 signing bonus and a $3 million signing bonus is the amount of PEDs you take in that amount of time. Like, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? Especially when nothing's guaranteed. You bust out your knee, something happened. You know what I mean? Like, you find out you have some CTE going on, like you got to stop. Well, I mean, this is what these people commit their whole lives to, and the amount of time and training that goes into that. It's not like you can just go do the next thing. Most athletes can't do that unless you're like Michael Strahan, who has is on the Today Show now, but that's an outlier situation. But yeah, I mean, the judgment that we place on people for things that we don't understand, generally speaking, I think that was the kind of the tip of the iceberg of what we're seeing now on a large scale. It's like this, I'm going to judge you based on my value system, regardless of what your value system is. And if your value system differs from mine, then I consider it invalid. And that to me is a short-sighted way of looking at things when, I think when it comes to government and politics, I say this all the time. I think it'd be better if the conservatives were libertarians and the Democrats were pure socialists. Like that way, the debates that we had would live in between those two things. And that's coming from somebody who's kind of a libertarian socialist in my own leanings. But it's like, at least those debates would be productive, because where the government overlaps right now, the gray area on the Venn diagram are the worst policies ever. That's why we've been in a 20 some odd year war, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. And where they overlap is also where people are, the people overlap as well, but it's not being it's actually not a representation of the people at all, right? It's actually the exact opposite. It's just big business, and it's just how they can kind of manipulate the system and manipulate the people. And if it was actually the people that were being heard, again, it would be kind of, I think people would get along a lot more and understand, but it's the extreme thinking, it's the extreme mindset. And then going back to like actually the actual debate platforms, those are just so, I mean, it's watching WWE at this point. I mean, it's literally just watching for entertainment purposes. And that's kind of a very scary place to be. And maybe that was just like the Trump thing. I really don't believe that. I think it was just, he was a perfect person in that scenario for that time, right? It was just literally entertainment. But now it's kind of still shifting that way. And it goes back to the previous point. If you can't question any of this stuff, if you can't ask, first you need to question yourself, right? You need to operate on the micro level and then start there. Like that's how people make change, whether it be religious change, as a coach, right? That's what you advise people. Start with yourself. You need to start with managing your own expectations, managing those voices in your head, and recognizing that you're none of those things, but you're all of those things. And to create an honest, healthy conversation within yourself. And then you could start to help. It's the Jordan Peterson thing, right? Make your bed, right? There's a lot of merit in waking up and making your own bed, right? Paddington Bear, an episode of Paddington Bear, right? They're cleaning the house and like, health, tidy house, tidy mind, right? Start with yourself and then worry about, but everyone's worried about out here and they're not, I don't want to say fixing, but they're not addressing their own shit.
Yeah, exactly. And and that's another, kind of representation of cognitive bias as well. It's like, well, I don't need to worry about this because other people are a bigger problem than me. Right. So this is a deflection of responsibility. And when the things that the, two-party system agree upon are things that we despise, right? Like endless wars and the war machine and $1 billion budget per year for the Pentagon, right? Like those kind of things that just are never questioned. The only thing they have to do to keep us at odds or to get us on their side are social issues like abortion and guns. And when you look at that whole thing, I think that they don't actually want those conversations to end. Those conversations are way too profitable, right? And maybe they saw them coming to an end. So now we have like a Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter narrative that's going on right now that's highly manipulated, or Stop Asian Hate, whatever it is. But when you have these things that are, think about how much fundraising comes from each side for being pro-choice or pro-life, or pro-gun or anti-gun. Like the amount of fundraising that goes into campaigns based on those two things alone is insane. And if you follow the money, you see that maybe those debates, quote unquote, aren't meant to end. They're meant to go on forever. Because if you look at back, Reagan era, he had very progressive abortion policies, and he's a Republican icon, right? But when you find out that you can make money by debating things that are unlikely to change, even when there's a common sense solution on both issues that is very equitable to both sides. Well, you got to think there's more to it than what we're being told, what we're seeing as the common narrative.
Yeah, the common sense element of things is where things start to trickle away very quickly. And there is, I think, to most problems, a common sense solution that does represent what should or could be done. But you're absolutely right, where it's just like, this is just common sense. And it starts to spew into other areas, but it's to your point of like, the conversation doesn't end, but why? Why isn't the common sense for both parties this, right? Why doesn't this make sense? And even to your point earlier, like the vaccination stuff, right? Now, I subscribe to your approach to things, right? All considered, I'm pretty healthy. I do, in my mind, what keeps me the healthiest I could be. But if people want to go get vaccinated, by all means. But for some reason, the vaccination stamp, sticker, card, everyone has to post it and go get vaccinated. And it's like, you're impeding on me, and you're judging me that I don't want to get vaccinated and I should go get vaccinated. But like, the minute I say my part, it becomes, you can't be okay with that. Like, I have to be okay with you posting and telling me to get vaccinated. And that's a conversation where you're like, oh, well, did you get vaccinated yet? No. Right? Like, no. And that's become the conversation.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I've heard this narrative a lot. I actually got into quite an argument yesterday about this, because somebody said, was say basically saying you're an idiot if you think that nutrition and exercise is more important than the vaccine. And so a friend of mine had posted that, and I took that personally. I'm like, you're calling me an idiot in your post, and then I reposted it and said that it was fucking stupid. But I was like, listen, I don't worry about my health only when crises happen. Right. I've been focused on this. I was a borderline obese kid. I was 200 pounds in the 6th grade. I made some serious lifestyle changes. It's very hard. I empathize deeply with people that are overweight and have food addiction issues, or addiction issues in general. I mean, I grew up with my parents being addicts. Like, I've been around this stuff for a long time, and I have a lot of compassion for anybody who struggles with any kind of dependency issues, whether it be food addiction, even working out to an extent, right? Whatever that may be for you. I care about health deeply, and I have for a long time, before it was trendy and before it was virtue signaling. And to think that you can call me a threat to society for not getting vaccinated, but I can't say that maybe you should quit smoking cigarettes or else I'm shaming you. Maybe that's a little bit of a skewed reality that we're living in, where I'm sitting here saying, well, I did the work on the front end. Now, if you are overweight, right, or if you are have type 1 diabetes, or maybe you're just old, and that's something you can't, there's things that there's reasons for people to get the vaccine that they have nothing to do with. And that is a very valid point. It's also not my responsibility that with what they're selling me now to get the vaccine to protect other people if the vaccine works. If you need it, well, what about multiple strains? And also, I don't like, that's not, we're not going there. Like, there's no proof of that. That thing isn't even FDA approved, right? It's immersed. I don't really take medication that's authorized for emergency use without a lot of history, right? And if 10 years down the road, everything looks fine, maybe I get it, because there's various strains or something like that. Or maybe we don't even talk about this anymore, but we'll cross that bridge when I get there. But the idea that now I'm a threat to society, right? I can't go to a concert at an outdoor venue because of something I choose for myself and the risk that I'm willing to take, when at the same time I can ride a motorcycle. Like, I do things that are more dangerous than COVID about 65 times a week. Right? Like, I hunt elk in the backcountry, right? I have as good of a chance as being killed by a mountain lion as I do dying of COVID. So at the same time, I'm like, well, if I was to take that kind of precaution against COVID, then I would need to basically stop doing everything that I do that I enjoy. Right. And same thing if you ride dirt bikes or motorcycles, or I like to go overlanding in my 4Runner, and like, all of that stuff can kill me, and I'm okay with that. Like, I do things that I love, and I accept the fact that I might die doing them. And that's a conversation that I have with my girlfriend as well. It's like, hey, like, I do some stuff that's pretty stupid and crazy, especially out in the middle of nowhere. And maybe that Garmin SOS device,
maybe it works, maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, it's like, I was actually climbing, kind of scaling kind of a steep hill one time, and it was on rocks, and we had, me and the guy I was with had about 60 pounds on our backs, and we were moving to a different area where we were hunting. And it was one of those things where I looked down, we got to the top, and I was like, if one of those rocks slip and you start tumbling down this hill, you have about a 50-50 chance that you're going to die. And that's not really your fault. Shit happens,
Right.
But it was a weird thing to just look at how that was laid out. And I wasn't even thinking about it at the time, right? I was just kind of in a flow state, moving from one spot to another. But it puts things in perspective, and I live my life that way. If you don't, that's totally cool. But to me, I'm not as risk averse. So it is weird to see that I take it personally to be villainized for my own like personal decisions. And that to me is something that I have a hard time not taking personally.
Yeah. And it's also the relationship you've established with who you are, what you are, your lifestyle, right? You've established this relationship, you want to call it with death or with your own potential demise, right? You've established this relationship that you're comfortable with, but you, through creating new comforts, you've broken out of comfort, right? But people stay in this comfort zone and stay in this mindset, right? You go back to and I want to ask you, when do you think this all kind of shifted? But people are reluctant to step outside the comfort. And that's where, again, that's where all the growing and all the learning does. And it resonates with religion or politics or your own betterment, is stepping outside the comfort. Back to my question, when do you think there was I think there's two kind of big moments in history where this villainization of the right and a villainization of the left transpired. One would be Vietnam. I think that post-Vietnam, it became trendy and cool and hip with not subscribing to the American mindset, right? And I think that there's value in that, right? I think that there's a value in that. What happened?
Shout out to LSD for that.
Yeah, exactly. There's a counterculture, right? And then the other one I would say was around that Colin Kaepernick time, right? It was, and again, it was okay for him to take the knee, but if you critiqued him taking the knee, you were a villain, you were wrong. And at that time, I was probably like, that's fucked up for him to take a knee. In hindsight, I'm like, okay, it's his right to do it, right? So I've changed and I've grown in my own relationship with that thing, right? And maybe I was a little bit more subscribed to America. My dad's a Vietnam vet. He's a cop, a retired cop. So, I grew up in a very American type of household to some degree, right? And proudly so. But there's been a shift in my own growth and development where I now question those things and go, well, it wasn't right for him to take a knee, in my opinion, at the time, but I've grown and I understand why he did it. Right. And it's his right to do that. Right. And we fight these wars and we make these protests and we stand up for the American dream. But what version of it? That's his version of the American dream. And I can't beat him over the head with my version of it. I have to respect his approach to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I think those two things, the funny thing is about the two things you brought up is that they're very intimately connected, even though they may not seem that way.
Yes.
Because the Vietnam era is what brought us the Nixon era drug policies, which are, and this is funny too, because people now systemic racism is a big conversation. And there's a handful of us that were talking about that kind of stuff before it was cool. You know what I'm saying? It was our drug laws are by default racist. That's what they were created for. That's why marijuana is a Schedule I drug. That's why people are in prison, and why our prison population has gone up 500% since the Nixon /Reagan /Clinton era drug policy. That's been the war on drugs. And that is what causes the police brutality that Colin Kaepernick was taking a knee against, right? And to be completely honest, I looked at that and I was like, you know what? If he's upset about something, he did it in a respectful way. He didn't sit on the bench. I think he did sit on the bench once, but then he took a knee. It's okay, taking a knee is something you do out of respect, right? It's different. It does stand out, but it's not like he's flipping off the flag or setting it on fire, right? This is a different situation. So I looked at it through that lens even at that time. But there are these big shifts like that for sure. And I think there's more and more of those that are happening, right? There's little flare-ups of it, like Starbucks cups that people get upset about, and that divides people somehow. But there's little things like that. But you do have these big kind of cultural shifting moments where when it came to Colin Kaepernick, there were very few people that were on the fence. It was either you agree or you don't agree. You think it depends on who you're listening to and who you believe in. For me personally, I had these shifts when I started realizing exactly what you're talking about drug laws were a big part of it, because I grew up terrified of drugs.
Sure.
Terrified of drugs. I mean, that's, my parents were addicts. So I had an issue with that. I didn't smoke weed till I was 20. I didn't do mushrooms until I was 27. So actually I'll tell my kids to probably hold off on that stuff. I feel like it's probably when you start messing with your own neurochemistry, I think it's probably better to do that in your late 20s.
Sure.
But for me, it was getting out of my bubble of my small town and moving to Austin, or moving to San Marcos, which is like 30 minutes south of Austin, and just getting around different kind of people, going to a college that wasn't small, tiny college where I went to play football in my first year. And then I transferred to Texas State, which was like diverse. And I was in a, all white fraternity. Like it was like, there's mostly white kids in that area, but I get to be around a bunch of people in classes and in groups and different things that were different than me. Got to be around a bunch of gay people and really started to enjoy, like, gay men crack my ass up. I even to this day love going to gay bars, which if you would have told me that at 12 years old, I've been like, you're crazy. Right. So that paradigm shift for me really was, it came from getting out of my own bubble and realizing the kind of things you're bringing up, where I started seeing how people were divided based on things that didn't actually add up and didn't really make sense. Right. Like the fraternity guys hated the GDIs, the goddamn independents, right? That were like, for the same reasons. Like they were all the same. They still worked in groups. They still had the same kind of parties, listened to the same kind of music, but for whatever reason, because of something that wasn't even real, right? It was an agreed upon grouping of people. You hate each other. And I would do that. This is even like way before psychedelics. I was just like, why are y'all upset with them? Like if a few of them come to our party, like just be nice to the guys and they'll be fine. Like what's the deal? And we had this situation where I started noticing that at a pretty young age, at about 20 years old. And that shifted a lot of things for me. And then when stuff like Kaepernick coming up, I was able to, and due to my spiritual development as well, and kind of personal development through a variety of practices, was able to zooming out of this stuff is the best thing to do. If you feel like you're in the mosh pit, that's not a healthy place to be, because you have to like be on guard all the time. Whereas if you zoom out and look at like, okay, where does systemic racism really exist? And where am I being told that it exists that it may not be? Right. Yeah. And like having those things be valid questions, right? What are the issues with policing? Right. And I'm like, well, a lot of cops are fat and lazy. That's a problem. And there are a lot of racist cops. Like, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to address that? That's a real problem, And I think about, and I've thought about running for office. If the world doesn't explode, it's like, well, then get access to Tim Kennedy and Jocko Willink and they'll help you out. Right. You know what I mean? Like get the people that know what's up, know how to be in that place, and know what it's like to live in a dangerous environment and have to do your job, and lean on people that know better to do things that are productive for society and make changes that are necessary. But then there's such this tug of war. And because of things like Kaepernick and moving on, like it just became like, what's the thing that everybody's going to be outraged about now?
Yes.
And it went from Kaepernick, and then, you have a few other things, then boom, George Floyd, who I hope Derek Chauvin gets crucified, dude. That guy, that is so beyond fucked up. And I don't know if you saw the testimony, but one of the guys, the guy who had the main video, he actually does jujitsu and MMA. So he was explaining what kind of choke that guy had and calling it a blood choke. Yeah. How he was shimmying. And I was like, yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to hear his testimony. You should definitely check that out. But then you have that, right? Then now we're moving on to Stop Asian Hate. Right. So now that's the thing that everybody's going to be divided on. So we're now it's, instead of, there was like big gaps between those things. Now they're like sandwiched back to back. Right. It's like one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And it's the same people that are driving that narrative, which I find very interesting and very problematic.
Well, I think a big part of it is that we keep on trimming the leaves of this tree, right? We're just like cutting the leaves and the branches, and we never, maybe for certain purposes, we'll say, for lack of a better term, we never get to the root of any of these issues, right? We never get to like the actual root of the issue, and maybe that's for an actual reason, right? And we can't know too much as people, right? But we are addressing all these leaves and these branches, and we're never getting to the root of any of these problems or these issues. And that's where we're never going to make progress as a culture. We're going to just keep on spinning our wheels, arguing with each other, finding reasons to separate, finding reason to hate each other. Like you said, like we didn't like the other frat, well, not me, you said it, but I was in a frat, but we didn't like them, but we don't even know why. Like there was no real reason why. It was just what was instilled in us from whomever for whatever reason. And it goes back to the point that you mentioned, like when we start operating on that micro level and we start looking internal, then we're able to extrapolate and move through the world differently, right? We're able to be exposed to more culture and more things and question things and moving. Like I grew up in the Bronx, right? Like you're talking about a hub of diversity, right? It is like I went to school with every like everything. I went to Catholic school, but there's still multiple religions and there's different people, and there's a beauty to that, right? There's something that's wonderful about that because you're experiencing the world. You're experiencing, what it actually is outside of your bubble, and people don't want to step outside that bubble, and they don't want to question any of it. They just want to get outraged about one thing or the other. And that becomes the narrative. That becomes, the thread that's replacing, the humanistic experience. And it's kind of, it's ripping everything apart in some regards, but hopefully, to your point that you mentioned earlier, hopefully we have to go through all of this, and it's like, the universe, right? It's ebbs and flows, right? So we have to go through this bottom to hopefully springboard and have some real formidable changes that more than less people can agree on.
Exactly, man. And I think, our attachment to ideas is really, we see that very clearly. And I think, like you said, you grew up in the Bronx. Like I grew up in some place that was the complete opposite, right? But I had to engineer
Bizarro Bronx.
Yeah, right. It was. I had to engineer bringing that into I had to like consciously go out and like search for different types of people and be around different types of people, different kind of cultures. College helps out a lot. I think that's one of the best things about college and getting away. Like I didn't know anyone. I knew like one or two people at the school I ended up transferring to. So it was really nice. I was able to make some friends and stuff. But it was just nice to have to go out and meet people and have to make your own decisions, and also gives you the freedom to be the kind of person you want to be. Because if you spend every year of your life with people that have known you since you were 15, like you really don't have the opportunity to shift, because they only see you as that person they've always knew. And when I see my friends from my hometown, they're like, man, you've sure changed a lot. And I'm like, well, yeah, that we've known each other for our entire lives. So like, I would hope that we've all changed a little bit, like there's things to change about. Like to think that my ideas as a 15-year-old like hold up now would be a little naive. But engineering that for yourself is something that people don't love to do. And I think that's where things like, jiu-jitsu is a great example, like group fit, like even CrossFit, for like doing things in a group and getting out and being around people is so beautiful. But I always play around this idea of like what we're attached to. And I don't really know. I would actually say I have serious doubts that the United States of America needs to exist in its current form much longer. And this is kind of a weird idea, but I think we'd be much better off if we function like the EU and we split the country up into 5 or 6 smaller countries. Like 330 million people is too many people to manage, right? You have people in New York that are chiming in on the border crisis in Texas and California. Like it's like the gap in reality between somebody who lives in Idaho and somebody who lives in LA is just so big. It's just so big.
It's alien. It's alien.
Yeah. And what, you say like, is that much different than like the difference in people who live in 2 different European countries? You know what I mean?
No,
like, or Nordic countries.
It's funny to your point. Like this was a while back. I went on a job interview in Waterloo, Iowa, right? For a rock station. Right. And I went there and I had complete culture shock. I'm talking like I was like, I was like, oh, start. He's like, oh, we just got our first, the program director took me out for lunch. It was an awesome experience. And he's like, oh, we just got our first Dunkin' Donuts. I'm like, what? I'm like I come from a place where you can go get a sandwich at the bodega at 3:30 in the morning, whatever time, like the world is open at your fingertips. And now I'm in Waterloo, Iowa, and there's just nothing. Like the town was the size of like my neighborhood. Like the entire town was like, it was so I literally felt out of body. Like it was alien at that point. And it's to your point, like you can't have people in these different pockets of the world, the country, and expect them to operate the same way mentally. And they're going to, like you said, they're going to weigh in on parts of the country they don't even know about. They don't know what it's like to be in Austin right now, or in Texas right now, where people are crossing over and there's an influx and there's just like, there's an energetic morphic resonance to that space that you can't feel or tap into, and people are expected to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an unrealistic expectation. When you think about it, and like I like to think about, I love Colorado. Like Colorado is home to me now, and it's like, dude,
I feel like I love it.
Oh, it's great, man. The politics are the lockdowns have been a little bit weird, and I don't appreciate it too much, but it is what it is. But if you think like you took Colorado and Utah and all the way up to Montana, right, all the way up to the border, to the Canadian border, all the way through, and you made that a country, seems to me that they would be able to make a lot better decisions for themselves based on the fact that our economies are very similar, that the people are very similar, the values are very similar. There's a good balance of left and right. And if you did the same thing, if Texas absorbed Mexico and Oklahoma and maybe even Louisiana, they'd be able to, like, that would just be Texas because it's Texas, but they'd be able to make decisions for themselves in a way that I feel is is appropriate for them. And that morphic resonance you're talking about, I like how you dropped some Rupert Sheldrake in here. But yeah, that's part of it too. I think there is a collective consciousness, and that's shifting. You're seeing that in these like pockets. You're seeing that in New York, there, where AOC is the Bronx, right? Is that what she represents?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like that conscious, like she represents those people, and that's something that people don't understand about politics too. Like you may love or hate AOC, she represents the ideas of her constituency. The same as Dan Crenshaw, same as Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, like same as all these people, like even not really Gavin Newsom, I wouldn't go that far, but a lot of people.
That's a tough one though.
Yeah, California is just a shit show.
Right, but that's a tough one, and it is like, yeah. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah, but I'm saying like you got to understand that they, even if you disagree with their ideas, it's not necessarily that person. Like they're a figurehead for the ideas of their constituents. So you're thinking about, by criticizing AOC, you're criticizing a large swath of the American population and villainizing them by calling her, the Wicked Witch of the East, right? It's a weird thing that we get into. We forget that all the people that elected those representatives are the people that you're talking about when you talk about elected representatives. And it's we don't think about that because they're like these kind of like political influencers. But we have to really accept the fact that those people represent valued individuals within our society, and we need to treat them as such and also hold them to account when they do stuff that conflicts with who they're representing. And we don't do enough of that at all.
Well, that was gonna be my point. That's the problem, is that we don't hold them accountable when we don't put their feet to the fire when these things come up. And yes, I agree with you to the point where they are a representation of a pocket of people, but there are people outside of that pocket in that area, right, that they don't represent. And now their voice isn't being heard from their small pocket of the United States or of the world, right? So it's like, again, the macro of the micro, the micro of the macro. These people are, yes, you're representing a majority, but there is a minority within that majority that is not being represented, not being heard. And that's where, again, it goes back to the point of like, maybe it would make sense for people to just create 5 separate countries and be like, okay, well, if you don't like the ideals or the essence of this section, move to this country, right? Just like scoot on over, right? Like,
And we would end up, and as long as Texas didn't go to war with everybody and try to create the United States as just Texas, then I think we'd be okay. And I think it would be a really interesting experience. But we're so attached to the idea of like the United States of America, when we really have just kind of, any country, in my opinion, that has the same kind of size as we do geographically, like Canada or Australia, they have like a third of the people at most, right. And we see like, we like to think of the United States as like the greatest country in the world. I just think that's objectively false. I used to say that no one can really know that. But people like to say that the United States is the best and most powerful country in the world. But how often is the most powerful thing the best thing? Really? Like, unless your goal is conquest, right? But I think we're kind of past. I mean, we are kind of imperialistic in the way that we view the world, but I think we've kind of moved past like the Alexander the Great era, or the Genghis Khan era of like conquest being
the goal,
greatness. And I think that we need to be really honest about that and know like, hey, there's countries that do different things. Like we can learn a lot from New Zealand or Sweden or Australia. Like there's, it's like, well, somebody said the other day about mass shootings, right? They're like, well, New Zealand had a mass shooting. And I was like, yeah, they had one.
We had 2 in a week.
Yeah, exactly. We had like 13 this year so far, or something like that, March. Right. And it's like, and I'm not saying that everybody needs to get their guns taken away, but what I'm telling you is that New Zealand lots of people have guns in New Zealand, and this shit doesn't happen. So what is different? And what are you attached to? Because I mean, we have ARs and stuff, which are fun. I love ARs. I think they're so fun. I've got one on the way, and I've got one sitting here right next to me. Like I have a lot of fun with them, but I don't worship them. Right. I don't worship. Like my life would be changed very little if I didn't have one, and I don't think my home would be any less safe. I don't think my family would be any less safe. So we have that conversation. Can we do something like that and learn from Canada? Can we learn from like the mistakes made? Can we learn from China? What's China doing?
Right.
We're so terrified, and we have to like have an other. Since the Cold War, it's been like Russia, China are the enemy. When really, if you look at what China has, like we have 20 times as many nukes as they do. They have 3 military bases outside of their country. We have 800. Right. So it's like, well, can you see why the whole world thinks that we're assholes? Because we kind of act like assholes, but we're so narcissistic in our belief about our greatness that we can't even zoom out and say like, well, maybe we're not as virtuous as we like to believe that we are. And no one is really as virtuous as they like to believe that they are. That's something you have to wrap your mind around.
Yeah, and it's a part of it's the unknown. It's a part of not being cultured. It's a part of not being experienced. And I think when people say like, "Oh, the United States is the greatest country in the world," in its essence, right, at its core, right, when we can reverse engineer, what it stood for to some degree, yes, it was equal opportunity. It was the melting pot of the world. It was a chance for anybody from anywhere to achieve their own personal dreams and aspirations. And in that essence, there's something very beautiful. And there's something about that that's unique on a global scale, right? That's not everywhere. But to say that and to still only identify in that egoic ideal of what the United States is a little, it's a little narcissistic, right? Like you could ask other people in other parts of the world and be like, I wouldn't go to the fuck United States for anything, right? Like no way. And it's whether it be pay or vacation or any of the ideas that we've established now, which the American dream. I went to a buddy's studio and he had this great pictures like you'll die trying to achieve the American dream, right? Like that's like you will like, and we identify egoically in what America represents on a global scale, but it no longer serves the world. It really no longer serves this country, and it doesn't serve the people, right? So we've moved so far away from that, and maybe at the time the views and the opinions and the laws and the orders that were put in place were not representing the entirety of the country, right? It was for a small populace of people, but we've moved past that, and unless we can move past that culturally, we'll always be at war with each other. We'll always be diverse, and we'll always be at each other's throats.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the American idea or the American dream, right? It's like the ideas aren't necessarily being represented. Like the ideas may have been the best in the world, but they're not being represented, right? And if we want to be a global superpower, to be, and I was thinking about this just recently, is like the best way to do that is probably what China's doing, right? They blend authoritarianism with capitalism. That's a way to be a superpower. Being a free and having freedom to do all kinds of things is not just it conflicts with being a global superpower. So you kind of have to pick a lane, right? We're trying to do both and manipulating the data to be another thing. And it's like, well, really, if you do exactly what China's doing, if we did that on our scale and we were authoritarian and we decided who succeeded and how it went down and what was popular and all this other stuff, then we could be able to maintain our global superpower status. But the world's changed, and this is where we're at. So do you want to be a free nation or do you want to be a global superpower? Because you got to pick a lane here.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to wrap your mind around, to know that like the goals, the means that we have to achieving our goals don't really add up, and for the richest country in the nation to not have adequate healthcare, and for insulin to be $500 a month, like we can look at that and be like, that's objectively broken. Can somebody please fix this? Right. Can we stop? Can we end some of these wars? Just like maybe half of them, and like take care of our own people first. Like the fact that I have to drive through 250 homeless people to get to the gym that is 7 blocks away, like that to me, I'm like, why are we bombing Syria? You know what I mean? Like none of this stuff adds up. It's like, well, the Taliban, I'm like, I don't give a shit about the Taliban.
It's amazing. We didn't hear about that for a long time.
Yeah.
We didn't hear about the Taliban or any of this for a long time. And now all of a sudden, like now that we're back to being comfortable, right? Well, we're back. The temperature of the country has dropped a bit, right? Not everyone's on edge. Now it's all of a sudden all that stuff's starting to bubble up all over again. And if you don't sit and question that's on you. And you can't expect people not to sit and question that and then ridicule and make them the villain for questioning that. But we haven't heard about any of that stuff for a long time, man. And now it's all starting to bubble up world. And it's at the very least, like the same thing I said about my own deep meditations or thoughts or feelings or energies or, quantum experiences, right? It's worth questioning at the very least. And if you can't step into that questioning, that's on you. And it's worth at least throwing it out there.
And the people that are making those decisions, right? And within Biden's cabinet, what was it, the director of the DOD or whatever it's called, he was a Raytheon executive. He's a defense contractor.
Right.
So at what point do defense contractors quit making decisions for when and how we go to war? Right. There's no objectivity there. Like they have a financial stake in that. And it's a problem. And it's so clear, but we're having these other conversations that I feel like are less valuable than that. And again, to your point about accountability, it just doesn't really exist. It doesn't seem to exist anyways.
Yeah. We'd rather just cancel Dr. Seuss or Mr. Potato Head.
Yeah. Mr. Potato Head. That stuff is so silly. But I will tell you that Lil Nas X song, the new one, the track is good.
Right, I'm gonna listen to it.
I would listen to it. I'm like, man, this is way better than Old Town Road. But
right, I'm gonna dive in. Maybe I'll let my daughter watch the video.
I don't know. I let my girlfriend watch it. She's like, this is really cool. And then it gets to the end where he's giving Satan a lap dance. And she was like, oh, wow. Okay.
All right. We're here now. Connor, thank you so much, man. This is a pleasure. Where can people connect with you? Where can people follow you? Where can people get your services?
Yeah, man. So check out Politically Homeless, the podcast. That's the primary feed. I also have a Patreon where we do crowdsourced questions. So it's more of a Q&A every week. So people drop topics, questions, things they want me to jump into. And that's from the Patreon for the Patreon. So Politically Homeless podcast, the Politically Homeless Patreon. And then I'm Connor Wanders on Instagram, Connor with an E, Wanders with an A. And yeah, man, that's where you can find me.
Awesome, dude. I appreciate your time today. It was an absolute pleasure.
When I start doing interviews again, I'll hit you up. I think we'd have a good conversation. I want to dig into
it. Pleasure.
All right, brother. See you later.